My mother's name was on a building before I was born. Not a plaque, not a small dedication in the lobby, an actual building. The Hargrove Family Pavilion at St. Catherine's Medical Center in Charleston, South Carolina. Granite letters, 6 inches tall, right above the main entrance. My grandmother had donated the wing in 1987, and the family had practiced medicine there ever since. My father was chief of cardiology. My mother ran the OB/GYN department she'd helped build from 12 beds to 43. My uncle was a hospitalist. My older brother was finishing his residency in orthopedic surgery. I grew up eating Sunday dinners with a conversation moved from hospital politics to insurance reimbursement rates, to which pharmaceutical rep had been too aggressive that quarter. I could name every department head at St. Round Catherine's before I could drive. Medicine wasn't just a career in our family. It was the air we breathed, the language we spoke, the thing that made us who we were. The only problem was, I didn't want any of it. I figured that out slowly, the way you figure out most important things. I wasn't bad at science. I wasn't squeamish around blood. I did fine in AP biology, fine in chemistry, fine in everything my parents pointed me toward. But fine wasn't the same as alive. The only time I felt genuinely awake was in my economics class junior year, when my teacher, Mr. Mader, Donnelly, showed us a case study about how hospital systems were hemorrhaging money despite full patient loads and asked us why we thought that was happening. I raised my hand and talked for 4 straight minutes about billing cycle inefficiencies and nursing staff turnover costs and the downstream effects of poor vendor contract management. He stopped me mid-sentence and said, "Where did you learn all that?" "Sunday dinner," I said. He laughed. The class laughed. I didn't. I went home that night and did what any 17-year-old with a creeping sense of self-awareness does. I made a list. On one side, what I was good at. On the other, what made me feel something. Business. Systems. Numbers that told stories. The way an organization could be structurally sick the same way a body could be, and how fixing one wrong thing in the right place could change everything downstream. I wanted to run healthcare, not practice it. I wanted to sit at the table where the decisions actually got made about how a hospital lived or died as an institution. When I told my parents that, I was 18 years old, sitting at that same Sunday dinner table, and the reaction was like I'd knocked over a glass of water. My father set down his fork very carefully. My mother looked at the wall for a moment before she looked at me. "Healthcare administration," she said, like she was tasting something unfamiliar. "Business school," I said. "Then a master's in health services management." "There are programs specifically for, you want to be a suit," my brother said. He wasn't being cruel. That was just what he thought. To him, to all of them, there were doctors, and then there were the suits who got in the way of doctors. "Someone has to make sure you get paid," I said. That got a strained smile from my father. But it didn't change anything. They didn't fight me on college. They were reasonable people, my parents. They sent me to the University of Virginia, where I double majored in finance and health policy, graduated magna cum laude, and got into the joint MBA-MHA program at Johns Hopkins on my first application. That part they were proud of. Hopkins meant something, even to them. When I walked across that stage in Baltimore 4 years later, my mother cried. But when I came home for Thanksgiving that same year, my first year as a management consultant working healthcare clients across the Southeast, my father said something that I have never been able to fully unhear. We were talking about his practice. He and my mother had recently formalized a private group practice on the side, Hargrove Medical Partners, which operated alongside their hospital privileges at St. Catherine's. It was a boutique thing, a concierge medicine setup for affluent patients who wanted same-day appointments and a doctor who knew their name. They'd been growing it slowly, and now they were starting to think about expansion, taking on partners, adding specialties. I said casually, the way you say anything at Thanksgiving, "Have you thought about bringing in a business manager? Someone who could handle the operational side so you're not..." My father interrupted me. "We've thought about it. We need someone who understands what we've built here. The practice is a legacy. We're not looking for corporate people." "I'm not corporate people," I said. "I'm your daughter." He looked at me across the table, and I saw something shift in his face, something he didn't quite try to hide. "You don't have a clinical background," he said. "The patients trust us because we're physicians. Everything we've built runs on that trust. Bringing in someone who doesn't understand that world from the inside, it sends the wrong message." My mother put her hand on his arm, which was her way of saying enough, but she didn't disagree with him. She didn't say anything at all. I drove back to my apartment in Charlotte that Sunday night and I thought, okay, I understand. And then I thought, watch me. The next 7 years were the most focused years of my life. I kept my head down at the consulting firm. I took every healthcare client I could get, every struggling rural hospital system, every private practice merger, every insurance contract renegotiation. I learned the mechanics of the industry from the inside out, not from textbooks, but from sitting in conference rooms with CFOs who were 3 months from insolvency and figuring out how to keep the lights on. I was good at it. I was very good at it. At 26, I was made the youngest senior associate in my practice group. At 28, I was recruited to join the operations team at Meridian Health Group, a mid-size regional health system headquartered in Atlanta, as Director of Strategic Initiatives. At 30, I was promoted to VP of Finance and Operations, overseeing a portfolio of 11 facilities across 3 states. During those years, I went home for Christmas, sometimes Thanksgiving. My parents and I had a functional relationship, the kind where everyone is polite, because they've agreed not to revisit the thing that would make them impolite. My father asked about my work in the way you ask about someone's hobby, with interest, but not investment. My mother was warmer, but she had a way of steering conversations back toward my brother's surgical milestones, toward the practice, toward the family business I wasn't part of. I didn't blame them. They had built something real, something they were proud of, and they had a picture in their minds of what the next chapter looked like. I just wasn't in it. What they didn't know, what I had very deliberately not told them, was that for the past 2 years I had been working with a private equity group out of Boston on something much larger than my VP role at Meridian, a consortium acquisition, a target that I had identified, analyzed, and championed through 18 months of due diligence. The target was St. Catherine's Medical Center, the hospital where my grandmother's name was on the building. I want to be careful about how I tell this part, because it wasn't about them. I need you to understand that. The acquisition wasn't revenge. I hadn't been sitting in my apartment in Atlanta plotting some elaborate scheme to humble my parents. That's not who I am, and it's not what happened. What happened was that St. Catherine's was in serious trouble. The system had been poorly managed for a decade, bloated administrative overhead, aging facilities, a physician alignment problem that had been creating quiet exodus for years. 3 of their best cardiologists had left for a competitor system in the past 18 months alone. Their OR utilization rate was running 15 points below regional benchmarks. Their payer mix had shifted badly and their CFO hadn't adjusted the revenue cycle to compensate. I knew all of this because it was my job to know things like this, and when the PE firm first brought me the deal as an outside analyst, I flagged it as a significant turnaround opportunity with a strong underlying asset base. The asset base, of course, included everything my family had spent 30 years building there. The reputation, the patient relationships, the Hargrove name on the building. I recused myself from the initial analysis and disclosed the conflict of interest to the firm's managing partner, a straightforward woman named Eleanor who had seen everything and was not particularly rattled by family complications and healthcare deals. She thought about it for a day and called me back. "You know this asset better than anyone I could hire," she said. "Stay on, we'll manage the disclosure." So I stayed on. I worked the deal for 14 months. I led the operational restructuring plan. I negotiated with St. Catherine's board, and when the acquisition closed in November, I was named Chief Operating Officer of the newly restructured entity, now rebranded as Callaway Regional Health System. I was 31 years old. I told my parents the week before the press release went out. I drove to Charleston on a Thursday, which I never did, so they knew something was coming. We sat in the living room with coffee, and I told them all of it, the consulting work, the PE relationship, the acquisition, the new role, everything. My father was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The Hargrove Pavilion. Still standing, I said. The name stays. I made sure of that. My mother looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. I still don't have the right word for it. My father said, "You should have told us." I know, I said. I disclosed the conflict to the board. I followed the process. But I should have told you. There was a long silence. Is this about what I said at Thanksgiving? He asked. About the practice. And I said, no, this is about what I said at Thanksgiving. This is me, 8 years later, showing you what I meant. He nodded slowly. My mother reached over and took my hand without saying anything. I should tell you about the meeting because the meeting is the part people always want to know about. It was about 3 weeks after I started in the COO role. I was still in the phase where half my days were spent in back-to-back meetings with department heads and service line leaders. The standard new leadership immersion period where you listen more than you talk and try to understand the culture before you start changing anything. My assistant, a sharp 24-year-old named Phoebe who had been with the system for 2 years and knew where every body was buried, knocked on my door at 2 in the afternoon and told me that the Hargrove Medical Partners Group was asking to schedule a meeting. They'd been trying to reach the COO's office for a week. I knew this was coming. I had been waiting for it, actually, with a kind of calm curiosity. What's the stated topic? I asked. Partnership and acquisition discussion, Phoebe said. Their managing physician wants to discuss a potential integration arrangement. Schedule it, I said. Next week? Full executive meeting room. She nodded and left, and I sat at my desk for a moment and thought about my grandmother's name on the building outside. Then I opened my laptop and got back to work. The meeting was on a Tuesday. I arrived first, which I always do. I was standing at the window when they came in, my father, my mother, and a third physician I recognized as Dr. Turning. Warren, who had joined the practice 2 years ago as their internal medicine partner. My father walked through the door and stopped. I watched his face go through several things in quick succession. Surprise. Then a kind of controlled blankness that I recognized as his professional face. The one he used when something unexpected happened in a clinical setting and he needed to be steady for the people around him. My mother put her hand on his arm. Dr. Tertrand. Warren looked between all of us, clearly sensing something he hadn't been briefed on. Hi, Dad, I said. Hi, Mom. We sat down. I had a full meeting agenda. I had prepared it the same way I prepare every meeting. Organized, specific, with time allocations for each agenda item. I was not going to be anything other than professional. That was a decision I had made. My father found his voice. You are the COO. Yes, I said. Since November 1st. You didn't tell us who you were presenting to. You were presenting to the COO of Callaway Regional, I said. Now you know who that is. Should we continue? He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, yes, let's continue. That was the moment, I think, where something changed between us. Not everything. There was still so much that was unresolved, so much we hadn't said to each other over the years. But the way he said, let's continue, without deflection, without ego, that was something I hadn't heard from him before. I walked them through the integration analysis. Hargrove Medical Partners was, from a purely operational standpoint, an asset worth acquiring. Strong patient retention, good payer mix, physician-led governance model that could fold cleanly into our employed physician group structure. There were real synergies. I presented them clearly. Then I put up the slide that showed the financial terms. My father looked at the screen for a moment. That's a fair offer, he said. It's the market rate, I said. Based on EBITDA and a standard healthcare practice multiplier. I had an outside valuation firm run the numbers independently. My mother said quietly, you made sure it was fair. Yes, I said, I made sure. Dr. Paying. Warren, to his credit, looked at his notes and asked 3 intelligent questions about the governance structure for existing partners post-acquisition. I answered all of them. The meeting lasted 50 minutes. At the end, my father said they would take the materials to their attorney and respond within 2 weeks. As they were gathering their things to leave, my father paused at the door. Dr. Warren and my mother had already stepped out into the hallway. I said you didn't have a clinical background, he said. I said that was the thing that mattered. You did, I said. I was wrong about what mattered. He looked at the conference table, then back at me. I wasn't wrong that you understand this world from the inside. I just didn't see it the right way. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, the offer stands for 60 days. Take your time. He left. I stood at the window again, looking out at the parking lot, at the edge of the Hargrove Pavilion visible from where I was standing. I thought about that Sunday dinner when I was 18. I thought about the drive back to Charlotte in the dark. I thought about every Sunday after that, when I went home and sat at that table and talked about things that didn't matter, while the thing that did matter sat unspoken in the middle of all of us. Then I picked up my phone, called Phoebe, and asked her to reschedule the 3 o'clock to 4. I had work to do. The practice signed the acquisition agreement 41 days later. The integration took 8 months. There were hard conversations, not between me and my parents, but between the practice and the health system's physician compensation committee, between the existing medical staff and the new physicians coming in under the restructured model. That's how these things actually work. The drama is always in the details, in the contract language, in who gets which parking spot in the physician garage. I had learned that years ago. My father and I found a new rhythm slowly. He joined the medical staff quality committee and turned out to be genuinely good at the kind of structured peer review process that a lot of physicians find uncomfortable. My mother expanded her practice under the employed model and within a year had recruited 2 additional OBGYNs to build out a women's health service line she'd wanted for a long time, but never had the administrative infrastructure to execute. She told me that at Christmas dinner a year and a half after the acquisition closed. She said, I want you to know I'm proud of you. I've been proud of you for a long time. I just didn't know how to show it when I didn't understand what you were building. I said, I know, Mom. She said, I should have said it sooner. I said, you're saying it now. My brother still calls me the suit sometimes, but he says it differently now, with something closer to respect than dismissal. He came to me last spring about the orthopedic surgery department's staffing model, and we spent 2 hours at my kitchen table going through workforce data together. He didn't ask anyone's permission to do that. He just showed up with his laptop and said, You're going to tell me I'm right, aren't you? I looked at his numbers. No, I said. You're looking at it wrong. But I can show you the right way. He laughed the way he used to laugh when we were kids, before medicine turned us into 2 people who spoke different languages. We ordered pizza and worked until midnight. Someone asked me recently at a conference whether I ever regretted not pursuing clinical medicine, whether I thought about the road not taken. I told them the honest answer, which is no, not for a single day. I never wanted to practice medicine. I wanted to build the systems that let medicine happen, that keep the lights on, that make sure the nurses are staffed and the supply chains aren't broken and the facilities don't crumble under deferred maintenance while the people inside them are trying to save lives. That work is invisible in the way that all good infrastructure is invisible. Nobody notices it when it's working. My grandmother donated a building because she believed in something. My parents spent their careers inside that belief. I spent mine making sure the belief had somewhere to stand. The name on the building hasn't changed. It still says Hargrove. So does mine. I've had a lot of time to think about what my father actually meant that Thanksgiving when he said I didn't understand the world from the inside. I don't think he was being cruel. I think he genuinely believed it, that there was only one kind of inside, and I wasn't in it. That's the thing about the people who love you most. They can be the most precise about your limits, and the most wrong. What I know now, having sat across from him in that conference room and watched him find his way back to himself in real time, is that the years in between weren't wasted. Every one of them was load-bearing. The consulting work I did at 23 for a rural hospital system in Georgia that was 6 weeks from closing, that taught me something. The nights I spent rebuilding revenue cycle models for clients who had no margin for error, that taught me something. The moment I had to disclose a conflict of interest to Eleanor and sit with the discomfort of not knowing whether she'd pull me from the deal, that taught me something that no amount of talent could have taught me on its own. You don't get to skip the years. That's the part nobody tells you when you're 18 and certain, and sitting at a dinner table trying to explain yourself to people who've already decided what you are. The path isn't the obstacle. The path is the point. I think about my brother calling me the suit when I was a teenager. He wasn't wrong that I was different. He was just wrong about what different meant. The suits who get in the way of doctors are the ones who don't understand what doctors are actually doing. I spent a decade making sure I understood it, not from inside a clinical rotation, but from inside every broken system that was making their work harder than it needed to be. That's a different kind of inside. It's not lesser, it's just harder to see from where my father was standing. What I respect about him, what I have always respected, even during the years when we were polite strangers at Christmas dinner, is that when he sat across from me in that conference room and understood what had happened, he didn't perform anything, he didn't make it about himself. He said, "Let's continue," and he meant it. That takes something. Not everyone has it. My mother said she'd been proud of me for a long time but didn't know how to show it when she didn't understand what I was building. I've thought about that sentence more than almost anything else she's ever said to me. Because I think most of the pain in families doesn't come from a lack of love. It comes from a failure of translation. We speak different languages and we mistake the gap for distance when it's really just vocabulary. Sloan, that's what I think of when I think about what this whole story actually cost and gave back. Not the acquisition, not the title. The Tuesday afternoon when my brother showed up at my kitchen table with his laptop and said, "You're going to tell me I'm right?" And I looked at his numbers and said, "No, but I can show you the right way." We ordered pizza. We worked until midnight. We were just two people who grew up in the same house, finally speaking the same language. That's what the years were for.